Hi, everyone. Welcome to a very, very special webinar with both PharmAla Biotech and Vitura. Thanks for joining us. Great to have you guys all on. We're going to be talking today a little bit about Cortexa, our new joint venture in Australia. Give you guys a taste of what's to come. First, I'll introduce myself. I think most of the folks on the webinar should know me. I'm Nick Kadysh. I'm the CEO, founding CEO of PharmAla Biotech. And with me is Rodney Cocks, the CEO of Vitura. Rodney, why don't you take a couple of minutes, introduce yourself to everybody on the webinar and tell us about yourself.
Great, thanks, Nick, and good evening to all those dialing in from North America, and good morning to all those dialing in from Australia. Good to see some familiar names on the participant list and some new names to get to know not just Vitura, but the Cortexa joint venture. Looking forward to talking with Nick and the broader audience this morning about our exciting new joint venture and our first foray into the psychedelic space. And really, we couldn't think of a better partner with PharmAla, Nick and his team to form Cortexa. So we'll be focusing on that this morning, and we look forward to taking your questions. I know there's a chat box which you can enter those in, and we'll work through those. And we've got plenty of time to get to all those questions this morning.
Yeah, I think we were going to take about 10-15 minutes. We're going to walk through a little bit about Cortexa, talk about what we want to achieve in the Australian market with this new joint venture, and then we'll take the questions. Our friend Conway is here. We'll read out the questions to us, and both Rodney and I will field them. Why don't we start just again for those who are just meeting us for the first time, because we have eyeballs from different countries now, different continents, different time zones. Maybe we'll start just by introducing the two companies that are the shareholders of this 50-50 joint venture. Rodney, would you like to start, or you want me to go first?
Yeah, I'll kick off, and thanks, Nick. For those that aren't aware of Vitura, we are a digital healthcare business which is focused predominantly in the cannabis space, and we're listed on the ASX, the Australian Securities Exchange, here in Australia. We trade under the code VIT. There are two main components to our business. The first is the CanView platform, and CanView is the leading platform in the medicinal cannabis space here in Australia, and is an ecosystem that brings together prescribers, patients, pharmacists, and suppliers all on that platform, and it facilitates the prescription, dispensing and distribution of medicinal cannabis products. And we distribute about 100,000 products a month through the platform, servicing tens of thousands of patients nationwide through our two distribution centres, one located where I am now here in Melbourne, and then the second on the Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia. So that's the first part, and by far the majority of the business, and it's relevant to the Cortexa joint venture, is that will facilitate the distribution of the GMP, MDMA and psilocybin products through the CanView platform, which will enable for the safe, secure distribution and compliant distribution of those products through the platform. The second and smaller part of our business is two clinic brands, CDA Clinics and Canadoc. Those two clinics are predominantly focused on consults to patients wishing to access medicinal cannabis, and that's done via telehealth nationwide. And again, those businesses are seeing tens of thousands of patients through our nurse and doctor network countrywide. And the addition of psychedelics to our distribution platform is an exciting step for us. And it's something we're very much able to do within the current infrastructure. And it's an example of us using that developed sophisticated infrastructure for another purpose, for another product that we can put in the hands of patients and work closely with psychiatrists here in Australia, as we do with many general practitioners and specialists here. So I think that's a good introduction to Vitura. Look forward to your questions and talking more about Cortexa. But probably hand back to Nick now for a quick overview on PharmAla and the journey to date, and then we'll get into Cortexa.
Sure. Thanks, Rodney. PharmAla is a pretty simple business. We're relatively young, certainly as compared to Vitura, we're relatively young. We started this company basically to do two things. The first is to research and develop novel analogs of MDMA. Specifically, we look for analogs that have a better safety profile, have a regulatory background. So, the joke I always tend to make, and those who've heard me say it before, I beg your indulgence, but the joke is, for regulators, if a drug doesn't work, that's too bad. And if a drug is unsafe, everyone gets fired. So we focus on safety because that's what regulators want to see. And then the other thing that we do is we are a GMP manufacturer of MDMA. And through a partnership with Mindset Pharma, we also retail GMP psilocybin. For us, very, very exciting times. The opening of the Australian market with real patient access, a real scalable model where patients can get these drugs prescribed by the authorized physicians, authorized psychiatrists in the case of Australia, is a sea change, I think, for the psychedelics industry. And when the change happened, we knew that we immediately had to jump on it. As I think the only company in the world today that has both GMP MDMA and GMP psilocybin in inventory, made, ready to roll, we knew that we had to find the best possible partner to launch in the Australian market. My background is having worked in a bunch of great businesses, actually, but Red Bull, I think, is especially a very well-run company. What we learned at Red Bull is very, very tough to do it yourself, right? You have to have good partners who know the territory, who know the rules, who know how to execute in that market. And I have never been to Australia, so I was not going to be that guy. But super, super pleased to have found Vitura. And over the past 2 months, as they did due diligence on us and we did due diligence on them, to really find a team that was engaged and incredibly competent and excited to work on these products. So Rodney, I want to hear from you, man. I want to hear from you, from your perspective, sort of how this all rolled out. And maybe I'll jump in with a few non sequiturs here or there.
Sure, thanks, Nick. And I think it's no secret that we, as the rest of Australia, was quite surprised on the 3rd of February. The TGA announced these changes, and just to summarise those, that from 1 July this year, so in about 6 weeks, the TGA will be downscheduling MDMA and psilocybin for use by authorised prescribers, psychiatrists only, in this market. And let's look at the two products that are going to be downscheduled. Firstly, MDMA. As a veteran myself, obviously we've seen MDMA used in many contexts, particularly for treatment of PTSD in North America, and some amazing results being achieved in those markets. And the TGA has downscheduled MDMA for use for the treatment of PTSD in Australia from the 1st of July. And then secondly, to psilocybin. Psilocybin downscheduled from Schedule 9 to Schedule 8 on the 1st of July for treatment of treatment-resistant depression. And the two conditions I've just outlined with PTSD and treatment-resistant depression are not only hugely impactful on those that suffer from those conditions, but we're also seeing large numbers of patients in those cohorts in this country. So we think that one, this is a significant opportunity commercially, but more importantly, we're going to be at the forefront of helping those patient cohorts, some of the most vulnerable in our community, in our society here in Australia, access these potentially life-changing therapies here. So we're really proud to be at the forefront of that. So in summary, the changes happened quite by surprise, and I think that no one really saw this coming over the horizon. But at the same time, we've used that time since the 3rd of February to scour the globe. That's where we came across Nick and his very, very experienced and skilled team. And then started a conversation with Nick and his team around partnering to enter in this market here. And I totally agree with Nick's sentiment about going it alone. We have a lot of the answers. We don't have all the answers. We don't have all the experience. And we've seen this in cannabis as well, that we're seeing companies carve out parts of the value chain and focus on those parts, as we've done with our business, and we intend to do the same with the psychedelics business here in Australia. And we think we've found the best partner in the world with PharmAla and Nick, and we're looking forward to what that brings. I also think that a big part of it is not just making sure we can access GMP products for the supply chain here in Australia, but also doing that in a very compliant way. As Nick said, doing it in a way which works with, not against the regulator, which takes into account all those regulations and meets or aims to exceed those in all cases. But also with a future-proof joint venture. And by that, I mean that, sure, this market is going to scale in time. It's going to start small and continue to grow. But as part of the joint venture, PharmAla will be providing IP to the joint venture, which will enable us to onshore manufacture these products. We've already had discussions with contract manufacturers here in Australia who are very excited about partnering with us to manufacture here in Australia. That's not going to be day one, probably won't be week one or month one. But as we scale, it removes that complexity of imports and guarantees supply here in Australia. And we're really excited about that really phase two of the joint venture in order to bring manufacturing onshore. Yeah.
Look, I think that that's a hugely important part of the joint venture. I don't know if people have really gotten their heads around it, but people, when they talk about import export, they think that you get a customs broker, you put something in a container, it arrives a few weeks later, no big deal. Unfortunately, with these types of molecules, which are controlled substances, they're subject to UN treaties governing controlled substances. Import export is a huge burden. It's a cost burden, it's a regulatory burden, it's an incredible time burden. I speak, prior to this announcement, really our business was selling to researchers. And I would always tell researchers, like, if you need it in a month, you're not getting it. It's not happening, right? Because the import export process is going to take 2-3 months, bare minimum. And that's if nothing goes wrong, which oftentimes when you're dealing with heavy regulations, it does, right? Nothing catastrophic, but there's just there's delays, and there's government entities that get involved, and things can take time. So number one, I think it's hugely important for the future of Cortexa to be able to manufacture onshore. We're very excited about that. It also builds capacity for the industry. I know that in the work that Vitura has done in cannabis, this has been the thought process, but it's about building the entire pie, right? Making sure that the entire sort of industry is healthy. And already we've seen great uptake from companies that intend to launch clinics. And Cortexa already has a number of contracts in place that PharmAla secured that we're transferring into the joint venture, so that day one, it's financially healthy, it's ready to roll, and we have these relationships already in place that we can build into long-term agreements, hopefully, that can support Cortexa for a very long time.
Yeah, I think that's a key point, Nick, is this is not just something we've set up and we hope will be successful. And I appreciate the initial work that was done in that sort of February, March timeframe of securing the contracts by PharmAla, which we novated into the joint venture. So we're talking revenues day one. We're talking a business model day one, which is really important. And secondly, the channel to market. And we know this through cannabis. We know how important those linkages between the product distribution and the authorized prescriber network nationally. We've engaged with the Royal College of Psychiatrists. We've engaged with the main prescribing groups or the 2B prescribing groups in the country, and assuring them that we can supply them with GMP quality, consistent supply, so they can take patients on board with confidence to be able to treat them. And I think that's an underpinning pillar of what we're doing with Cortexa.
Yeah. Listen, from my perspective, in addition to just the absolute operational excellence that we saw from the Vitura team, the thing that really sold me was even before we were done due diligence, just when we were in sort of letter of intent, we were sort of feeling each other out. The Vitura team was incredibly diligent about like getting us on with the regulators, talking through what this is going to look like, making sure that we were moving in lockstep with TGA as they were developing all these regulations for what is really a global first, which is not a position that regulators often like to be in. They don't love being out front. So I think it's a perfect match in terms of the capabilities that both teams bring to the table. And we're really excited to get started. I know 6 weeks might seem like a long time, but it's actually, in this world, very, very soon. Listen, let's keep talking for another 5 minutes. In the meantime, I'll ask anyone on who wants to ask a question, has a question, just put it in the chat, and Conway will get ready to read them out, and maybe we'll talk for a couple more minutes, and then we'll jump into the questions.
Sure. Thanks, Nick. And I think there's two points from my side before we get to questions and looking forward to those to make sure everyone's up to speed. I think that just to make the point for those Vitura shareholders on the call, and we made this very clear in the announcements as well, is that we spent a lot of time with Nick and his team. We were in Canada. Unfortunately, Canada didn't really turn on the weather with the blizzard that it served up for us in Toronto when we were there. So we'll have to get that right.
You didn't ask before you came. Like if you had asked before you came, and like you come in spring in Canada, there's going to be a snowstorm. That's just the way it works.
So it's certainly delivered. So, but we did take the time. We take these matters very seriously in terms of who we're partnering with. And again, for us, it was ensuring that our partner took compliance and adherence to regulations and working with the regulator as seriously as we do. That was certainly the case, and striving to hit those regulations at or above the required level. So that was really important, and it was a pleasure to get to know Nick and his team on the ground in Canada, and vice versa. I think that we certainly turned it on for Nick and his team when they got down. We've also taken a lot of lessons from the North American markets, although that we're in a situation where we can look to those analogs. They're not entirely applicable in terms of the regulations and how the substances are governed in North America, but there's a lot of analogs that we can look to for how the market will develop here. And in those patient cohorts I mentioned before with treatment-resistant depression and PTSD, the numbers are large, numbers are growing, but it's also provided an understanding of how these therapies are administered on the ground. And that's done through psychiatrists, that's done in a very controlled space. This is not a take it home, dose yourself type of therapy, which is very important for those on the call to understand, and that the role of the psychiatrist is central to the administration of these therapies. Yeah.
No, look, obviously with your military background, I'm sure that you have friends and colleagues who have faced, at the very least PTSD. I'm sure also depression as well. I mean, like this is a growing issue, not just in Australia, but really all over the world. And so I'm really, really pleased that we can, in some small way, start to address it. It's not a magic bullet. It's not, I know that there's a lot of people who are like really rah about psychedelics. I don't view it that way. It's a tool in the toolbox, but every tool helps. And if we can help patients, I think that's a net good for everyone in Australia, and hopefully other countries sort of follow suit, and we can start to help folks in other places as well.
Totally agree, Nick. And obviously we've still got the Royal Commission of Veteran Suicide, which is happening in Australia at the moment, and a lot of obviously linkages back to the causes of veteran suicide, particularly with PTSD. And if we can just save one life as part of that, I think that's going to be really impactful. And I think we can certainly do a lot more than that.
Definitely. Okay. Why don't we just jump right into the questions here? I see there's a first one from an anonymous attendee. Conway, do you mind reading out the questions as we go, and Rodney and I will try to answer them?
Absolutely. Yeah, from Anonymous, do you see a significant conflict of interest being a supplier slash distributor slash manufacturer of a drug and a clinic owner selling that drug to patients?
So just to be clear, Cortexa at this time has no plans to open their own clinics. Vitura has, I believe, some clinic properties that they operate. That's for the cannabis business. So that's
Correct.
not for Cortexa. Cortexa at this time is set up to be a supplier, distributor, and a manufacturer, but not a clinic operator. Rodney, anything else you want to add there?
Yeah, that's right. And again, I think it goes to the stated methodology that the TGA has approved, which is a psychiatrist only, authorized prescriber only ability to prescribe. And whether that will change in the future, that's really up to the TGA. We think it's appropriate that it's obviously a psychiatrist only therapy at the initial stages. But we'll stay close to the college. We'll stay close to those leaders in the psychiatry profession in relation to developments. I also had one. I'll bat it back to you, Nick.
Of course.
What's PharmAla seeing in this space in Canada? In terms of recent developments and trends we're seeing.
Sure, thank you. Well, actually, just today, yesterday for you, Rodney, because you're in the future, but today for us. We were approved for the very first special access program authorization for MDMA, I believe in Canadian history. Certainly, it's the only one in my lifetime. I'm 37, so in 37 years, there's never been one. So this is the first treatment of a patient with MDMA outside of a clinical trial. And actually, today we got two. So really excited about that. We do a lot of regulatory engagement just as part of our work. I think it's hugely important when you're working in sort of the leading edge of a space like ours, which is a highly regulated space. I think honestly, all eyes are on Australia right now. I think if we do our jobs right, and our job is making sure that that doctors who are authorized prescribers and patients have access to high quality, well-regulated, well-manufactured GMP materials, then I think the science, certainly on MDMA, to a slightly lesser extent psilocybin, but still, like, these are relatively well-documented molecules, and their effects are for MDMA, to my mind, just proven in the context of a clinical trial. So I am confident that if we do our jobs right, we can help patients. And really, that's the proof that everyone is looking for. Certainly, what I've been saying to the Canadian government in the last little while is, hey, look at Australia go. You guys might want to keep up.
Nice. Next question is from Rob. Can we talk indication and numbers in Australia? How many years runway are you giving yourselves to make this part of the business work? Is the decision to manufacture locally already made and going ahead, or is this a decision to be made in the future?
I'm happy to kick off. Yeah, I'm happy to kick off that. In terms of the market, we know that as I was saying earlier, that these are large total addressable markets as patient cohorts, both from the PTSD, and we've spoken a lot about veterans this morning, but there's many other professional categories that fit in there: first responders, emergency responders, medicos, and the like, that have suffered that debilitating condition. We think in terms of market size and scaling, one, we've got a large addressable market, but it's the catalyst for that growth into the market. We're going to see probably analogs along the lines of medicinal cannabis, where we're going to see those early adopters in terms of prescribers come into the market. They're going to be working with patients. Those patient stories are going to resonate within patient groups. Those patient stories are going to resonate within clinical groups. And it's exactly what we saw with medicinal cannabis. And I'll just give you some numbers on that side, not on the psychedelics. We IPO'd Vitura back in late 2019. I remember talking to investors at the time, and there was cumulative, not for that month, cumulative 2,000 patients who are accessing medicinal cannabis. Just to put that in context, we'll ship probably about 4,000 products from our warehouses today only. We're on a run rate of about 100,000 products a month. So you can see that uptick, and that's exactly the same conversations we're having around medicinal cannabis back in 2019 to where we are now. Those patient stories weren't out there, that clinical confidence wasn't out there. But we think that the clinical cohort of psychiatrists will draw on a lot of analogs from North America, from the success stories that they've been having in that market. And we think that, and particularly around those patient cohort groups, particularly veterans and the like, will resonate and will spread quite quickly. So I think that is going to be the catalyst for growth. But we're certainly not in a position at this point to give guidance around what a revenue number looks like or what patient numbers look like. Needless to say, there's very similar dynamics that I reflect upon back in 2019 that we're seeing here today.
Yeah.
On the question of matter. Oh, so sorry.
If you don't mind, I'll hop in on manufacturing.
Yep.
On the manufacturing side, one of the beautiful things about the way that we've structured Cortexa is it can grow with the market. So PharmAla has already manufactured GMP MDMA. We have GMP psilocybin in inventory. So for the beginning stages, I think we all agree it's going to start slowly and then begin to ramp. We can bring in materials from Canada. It's fully compliant. We've already spoken to TGA about it. There's no concerns there. So we bring in material now that's already pre-made. And then as the market demand grows, once we think that it's appropriate, we can start manufacturing. And so I think, look, I like those kinds of scalable business models. I think it's much more preferable than just having like an on-off switch. Conway, you want to go next?
Yes. This one is from Jay. What is the size of the market opportunity in Australia for the joint venture? What is the economic relationship between the joint venture and the shareholders outside of being shareholders funders? For example, will Vitura be receiving any service platform fees from the joint venture?
I'm happy to address that one. I think we've spoken about the market size and happy to be pushed on that further. And I draw your attention back to the ramp we just described there. I think the economic relationship between the JV and the shareholders outside of being shareholders in the entity, Vitura will be providing services to the joint venture in terms of distribution, and they'll be done at arm's length commercial rates as we do with the cannabis business at the moment. And we think that's appropriate, but it gives that joint venture access to best-in-class, secure, compliant distribution network here in Australia. And the joint venture has great confidence in Vitura's ability to undertake those services.
Absolutely. The joint venture will also be paying to PharmAla a license fee for our intellectual property and a royalty. Now, those two will disappear after the joint venture is established and profitable. So either within 3 years or once we show a significant profit that we pre-negotiated between the shareholders. So once this thing is up, running, and generating revenue, it'll just spin off dividends for both of the shareholders, and I think we're perfectly happy with that. Any other questions from anybody else? Conway, anything else?
Doesn't look so. Oh, wait,
Actually,
there's one more, I think, from Rob again. Can you touch on pricing of the new drugs and the differences in the regulation between cannabis and other drugs?
I'm happy to. Sorry, you want to go? You want to go, Nick?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. I'll take the regulation. You can touch on pricing. I think
sure. Give me the hard one. Sure.
Why don't you start with pricing?
Sure. Look, the first thing I will say is this is not cannabis, in that these drugs are incredibly low volume at this point in time, which is why we're kind of the only company in the world that's made them. So look, it will not be as inexpensive for patients as cannabis. I think we're estimating it'll be approximately $500 per treatment for MDMA, maybe a little bit less with psilocybin. However, The real cost is in the psychotherapy that makes up the bulk of the treatment. These are highly skilled professionals, psychiatrists, psychotherapists, and these folks need to be compensated for their time. And of course, in some of these therapies, especially with PTSD treatment with MDMA, there's a lot of therapy that goes into it. I mean, you are in the room for 6 to 8 hours in an MDMA-assisted psychotherapy session. So the cost of the drug is relatively minor compared to the cost of the therapy itself. Now, I know that there's been some movement already. Some of the insurers in Australia are already saying that they're going to cover this. And the reason why is actually very, very simple. You have to look at the cost of the illness, not just the cost of the treatment. And the cost of the illness is remarkably high. I mean, most people with PTSD, the traumatic incidents that trigger the PTSD begins, during their prime working years. Somewhere between 20 and 40. Relatively few people get PTSD late in life. And so if you think about the sort of the economic cost of an illness like PTSD, it's staggeringly high. I mean, if somebody, at 27 has a traumatic incident and then cannot work for the rest of their life because of their PTSD, that's a huge burden on that patient, and it's a huge economic loss. And so a cost of treatment of between $10,000 and $15,000 when compared to the economic cost and the quality of life cost to a patient is actually a great deal, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of most insurers who are looking at this. So I actually imagine that on the therapy side, we'll be seeing quite a bit of reimbursement relatively quickly.
Thanks, Nick. And again, just before I get on to regulation, I just want to also applaud the TGA for taking the bold step. As we mentioned earlier, these are Definitely. Sweeping changes that are being made, and there's global leadership around these decisions, and to touch the lives of those very vulnerable and have suffered as a result of their service. I think it's to be commended. Yes. I just want to move on now to the second part of the question in relation to regulation. There's similarities and there's differences. Let's just turn quickly because the question was around how does it differ from medicinal cannabis? Medicinal cannabis has 3 pathways for access here in Australia: special access scheme, authorised prescribers, and clinical trials. So again, and predominantly it's through an authorised prescriber channel that medicinal cannabis is accessed in Australia. Turning to psychedelics with MDMA and psilocybin, from 1 July, the TGA, and it's the same regulator as well. So all therapeutic goods are being regulated by the Therapeutic Goods Administration, part of the Federal Department of Health, and the states have a important but small role to play in that as well. With psilocybin and MDMA, the prescription is being done via authorised prescribers, but then the authorised prescription pathway is only limited to psychiatrists. Whereas with the authorised prescriber pathway with medicinal cannabis, you can be a general practitioner, you can be a psychiatrist, you can be a pain specialist, or a non-vocationally registered doctor in order to prescribe medicinal cannabis. So there are some similarities, but the bar for prescription is certainly higher because you've got a smaller cohort of potential prescribing doctors. That's the overlap and also the differences between the regulation here. We see the TGA taking a keen interest in the prescription of both these products in Australia, and we'll certainly be working closely with them to share our experiences with the distribution of these products.
Absolutely, and certainly we've already engaged with them, discussions about drug quality, how to measure drug quality, how to help physicians who end up registering as authorized prescribers, how to help them identify quality suppliers in this space. Hugely important to make sure that basically, look, we all have a responsibility to not screw this up. It's a monumental opportunity for patients, and so we have to do right by them, is my opinion. Conway, I see there's a question here from Real Paquette.
Yes.
Which I assume is a Canadian, but maybe not. Maybe that's an Australian person.
Could Cortexa serve as a distribution platform for other companies applying MDMA in Australia?
So if that is a clinic, then yes, absolutely. If that is a supplier distributor, then no. Cortexa is an exclusive entity So Vitura will not work with other MDMA and psilocybin suppliers, and PharmAla will not manufacture or sell with anybody but Cortexa.
From Jay, what disclosure is anticipated to be made to the market on KPIs for the JV so investors can understand success?
So I'll take that one, Nick, and I think there's one about recurring treatment that I'm keen to get you on as well. In terms of disclosure, Vitura and its subsidiaries are all obviously subject to continuous disclosure requirements. What I can say is we look forward to showcasing Cortexa's achievements, both with Nick in the Canadian market and here in Australia, to ensure that we are informing the market about that ramp we were talking about, and volumes and the like moving forward. So we look forward to updating the market. You'll see Cortexa will appear in the next edition of our investor presentation. And I can tell you it's something that, and I can see from the names on the call this morning, both current and potential investors are very interested in this space as an engine of growth for the company, in addition to what we're doing with our primary cannabis business in Vitura.
Absolutely. And yeah, look, we're also publicly traded, so we are also subject to continuous disclosure, and we will also be informing the market as we go.
Rial is a French Canadian Quebecois. Welcome, Rial.
I'm guessing yes.
We have
I think there's a question from Daniel Island there for you, Nick.
Yep. From Daniel, is this a recurring treatment? And if so, how often do patients require this treatment for it to be effective? Is this a lifelong treatment plan?
So in my opinion, this is the best part about psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, both with psilocybin and with MDMA. It is not a lifelong treatment plan. It is an acute treatment plan. For a protocol with MDMA assisted psychotherapy for PTSD, you do 3 treatments with drug, and in clinical trials, in phase 3 clinical trials, they found that about 67% of patients at the end of those 3 treatments were no longer diagnosed as having PTSD. So I really don't like to use the word cure when you talk about PTSD. PTSD is not like a disease that you contract or something like that. It is actually, I think, a very natural response to trauma in human beings. However, we see full extinguishment of PTSD for 2/3 of patients who go through this protocol. You may need a further session depending on how things go in your life later on, but broadly speaking, this is as close as it gets to a real permanent treatment for PTSD. Treatment-resistant depression, for anyone who's suffered depression, they know that it's not quite as simple. I think people kind of go through waves with depression, so there's definitely more, I think, of a likelihood that people will need to take psilocybin more than what I just described with MDMA. However, it is still at least as effective as the SSRIs that are sort of frontline treatments for depression. And just one note to keep in mind as everyone sort of watches the progress here, the indication that TGA has authorized for psilocybin here is not just depression, it is treatment-resistant depression, meaning that these are patients who have tried 2 or more different approved therapies and are still suffering from depression. It's a very, very, very difficult indication to manage for patients. And it's something that, obviously we found basically impossible to treat with current therapies. So anything we can do to help those people, I think is an amazing service. And I am actually, I'm quite hopeful that psilocybin therapy will be helpful to a significant number of them.
And just on a personal note from me, Nick, from my time in Iraq and Afghanistan, working closely with coalition forces, knowing several US Special Forces operators who returned back to the US, had effectively checked out of society due to their situation with PTSD, found their way, thankfully, to a treatment program and are now contributing, working, active with their families and the like. members of society. It's only a population sample of 2, but I certainly know those individuals, and I know that this therapy can work. And for those that it does work for, it works extremely well. And to Nick's point, this is an acute treatment, 3 months and potentially a follow-up, but that's what we're looking at here. And I think that that's really been a catalyst for the decision makers at TGA to take that bold step, to authorize the downscheduling of these substances, these medicines, and we're certainly proud as Vitura and Cortexa to be bringing those to market to help some of the most vulnerable in our society.
Definitely.
We have another question from Anonymous. What is the anticipated timeline for Cortexa to become cash flow positive?
Look, I can jump in. I think it's a little early for us to be making calls about timelines like that. Keep in mind these regulatory changes actually haven't happened yet. It's still not July 1st. So we will see how the market develops. Obviously, we've designed Cortexa to be nimble and to have revenue day one. It will also be able to drive revenue through clinical trials that are happening in Australia. And I do anticipate there to be significant clinical trial presence in Australia moving forward. But it's early days, and we're going to grow with the market as it grows.
This is the last question from our French-Canadian friend. Will you be looking to make Cortexa public in the Australian Stock Exchange in the future?
Happy to jump in there. I think that I can speak for Nick here to say that we are focused on building the business and getting products into the hands of psychiatrists so they can work with patients and continuing to build. That's our focus at this stage, and we're really looking forward to that exciting opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think not to go back to what we were saying earlier, but what really attracted us to Vitura was operational excellence and being able to execute in the market. And I think when you're dealing with patients and doctors, the healthcare system, highly regulated molecules, that's really what's important. So I think all of us owe it to our customers and the patients that they serve to put our heads down and do the hard work of actually getting these molecules to the people who need them. And then everything else will flow from that. I think that's it for questions, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, Rodney, any closing remarks for the folks on the phone before we shut this down?
No, we've had a lot of interest from literally opposite ends of the world in North America and down here in Australia. We appreciate everyone joining from both those markets. It is an exciting venture. It's great to be saddled up with Nick and his team. There's a lot of hard work to be done, but we're confident that we've got the right team, the right IP, the right systems, and the right operational excellence to make it happen. And of course, we look forward to doing more market engagement like this and continuing to update the market on Cortexa, its achievements. And lastly, I just want to also give a shout out to my team and also to Nick's team, the hard work that's, we're just up here talking about it today, but months of hard work and effort have gone into that, and I really appreciate that from my team, and certainly I say for Nick's team too. From my side, thanks for joining this morning. Over to you, Nick.
No, listen, couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks to everyone who's doing the work in the background. We are just the talking heads, but there's folks on both continents really working hard, as they have been for months, to make sure that this gets off on the right foot. And I do not look forward to the jet lag, but I do look forward to making my way down to Australia whenever possible, and really seeing how this develops. It's very exciting stuff.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks all.
Thank you very much for joining, everyone.